A priest gave up the priesthood for a woman who sold her body to survive. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The sky over Seattle broke into the morning, covered by heavy clouds, a cold gray that seemed to seep into everything. Emily Dawson awoke with a chill that crept across her skin and settled deep in her chest. It wasn't the light that had stirred her, nor any sort of appointment. It was the cold. A cold that came not just from the wind blowing through the overpass where she slept, but from within, from a deep emptiness that neither the cardboard beneath her nor the tattered clothes on her body could warm. She was 26 years old, and there she was, lying on rough concrete, sheltered only by filthy walls and concrete pillars. Her hands trembled, her lips were dry and cracked. Around her, crumpled plastic bottles, cigarette butts, and empty wrappers were scattered traces of others, just as forgotten as she was. No one was around. Only the echo of loneliness filled the cold space. Slowly, she sat up and rubbed her face. Her skin was dirty, hair matted to her forehead. She didn't need a mirror to know how far she had fallen. Years ago, she had dreamed of having a decent job, a tiny apartment, a simple, dignified life. But those dreams had died one by one. And now, making it through the day would be enough. Emily hadn't been born into that life. As an infant, she had been left on the steps of a shelter in Tacoma, another port city like Seattle. She grew up in foster homes, moving from house to house, always with that unanswered question in her eyes. Why had no one wanted her? At 18, she landed a job at a small home goods store downtown. She was proud to pay her own rent on a tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill. For a while, she believed she could build something for herself. But 6 months earlier, when the local economy faltered, layoffs came suddenly and without warning. Emily lost her job. Without family, without support, without savings, it didn't take long to lose the apartment. First came late rent, then eviction, and then the streets. Days blurred together, each tomorrow more uncertain than the last. That morning, like so many others, Emily's stomach ached from hunger. The cold gnawed at her bones. She knew what she needed to do. It wasn't a choice. It was the brutal necessity of someone with no other options. A worn-out body, dignity sold off piece by piece, traded for a handful of coins that would buy a few hours of escape. She stood with effort, straightened her wrinkled shirt as best she could, and walked the still empty streets. Her gaze stayed low, her steps careful. It didn't take long for a man to approach. No words were needed. A single gesture was enough. She followed him into a dark alley behind an abandoned building. There, surrounded by trash and broken bricks, she gave up a little more of what she had left. There was no affection, no desire. Just a transaction. The payment, dirty coins. The cost, another piece of her soul. When the man left without a glance back, Emily remained, her body tense, breathing deeply. The trembling coins in her hand would be enough for what she sought. A small measure of relief. She returned to the overpass, sat back on the cardboard, and pulled an old, battered metal pipe from her worn pocket. This was how she consumed the substance that allowed her to forget for a few hours. But just before lighting it, she heard footsteps, a different kind of sound. Not the steps of someone coming to find her, nor of other homeless souls. She looked up, her anger ready to explode, but saw something unexpected. A man in a black clerical robe stood before her, his gaze calm and direct. There was no judgment in his eyes, no fear, no disgust. "Did you come to pray for me, Father?" She spat bitterly, her voice sharp and cold. She expected him to turn away, but he didn't move. "I didn't come to pray for you," the man replied, his calm unnerving. "I came to listen. If you'd like, Emily said nothing, caught off guard. There was something different about him. Not pity, not superiority, understanding, as though this priest carried his own wounds. He opened a worn backpack slung over his shoulder and pulled out a small wax paper-wrapped bundle. He held it out to her. It's a ham and cheese sandwich. It's fresh. Emily hesitated. Trust had no place in her world. But hunger won out. She took the sandwich with trembling hands. Her first bite was cautious, the next more desperate. It was real food. And for once, no one expected anything in return. No price, no conditions. Tears spilled down her dirty face, washing away some of the built-up pain. The priest remained seated a short distance away. He didn't speak. He didn't rush her. He simply respected the moment. When she finished eating, Emily wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her voice came out in a whisper. "Are you leaving now?" He smiled, a calm, gentle smile. "I'll be back tomorrow if you'd like." She watched him walk away down the nearly empty street. When he was gone, she clutched the paper napkin tightly between her fingers, like a small charm. Later, as she picked up the pipe again, she thought about the unexpected gesture, the food, the look in his eyes. She wondered if it was still worth believing in anything. She didn't have an answer. But for a moment, she set the pipe aside. Not forever. Just for that night. Maybe the beginning of something. Maybe the faintest spark of hope. Morning slowly stirred over Seattle, the damp air sinking into bones, the moisture seeping from the cold cement beneath and spreading through the body. The first honks echoed through the streets, mixed with the muffled rumble of delivery trucks and the groan of cafe doors rolling up. The downtown slowly came to life. Small coffee shops readied for the day, displays being arranged, the scent of bread beginning to waft through the air. But under the overpass where Emily still huddled, time felt suspended, curled up against the icy wall, knees hugged to her chest. Her gaze drifted into nothingness. Sleep had been elusive. The night had been a battle between the urge to surrender to her pipe and the faint will to resist. In recent weeks, she couldn't recall having hesitated like this. But the priest's gesture the day before still lingered in her mind. A simple sandwich, a look free of judgment or pity. A man who hadn't come to preach or scold. He had simply been there. And that unexpected presence weighed on her chest in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't know if it was guilt or a spark of hope. She didn't know if she wanted to see him again, or if it would be easier if he didn't return. The fear of clinging to a new expectation was greater than she wanted to admit. As the day moved on, Emily wandered the streets, looking for coins. She knew where she might scrape together a few dollars, who might offer a small opportunity. Life on the streets taught survival, not living. A little cafe might pay a few bucks if she helped stack chairs or wipe tables. A grocery store donation basket might yield a forgotten loaf of bread. But nothing seemed to work that day. Her steps were heavier, the glances colder. Her body cried out for the numbness the substance brought. But something new stirred inside her. A thin thread of doubt kept her from giving in. And when the late afternoon painted the sky with soft oranges and pinks over the old buildings, she found herself drawn back to the overpass, as if pulled by an invisible thread. She didn't know if he would come. She didn't know if she wanted him to, but she went. And as she neared her spot, she saw him approaching. The same steady stride. The same worn backpack slung over his shoulder. The priest, she still didn't know his name, walked up with a calm air. He pulled a fresh bundle from his backpack. "I brought something different today. A chicken wrap and a little salad. It's fresh." His tone was easy, as if this gesture were part of an ordinary routine. Emily took the bundle with a barely perceptible nod, sat down as always. He did the same, a few feet away, respecting her space. As she ate, her thoughts churned. Why did he keep coming back? What did he want? What was he expecting from her? After finishing the last bite, she wiped her hands on the napkin, took a deep breath, and said, "How long are you going to keep up this charity act, Father?" There was bitterness in her voice, but buried in it was something else, a faint, unspoken hope, a wish, hidden even from herself, that he might answer, "As long as it takes." His reply came without hesitation, "Until you're done running." His words carried no hollow promises. They were calm and steady, and because of that, they struck deeper. Emily let out a dry laugh. "Running? I'm not running. Just trying to survive." But beneath the words, a crack showed through. She'd been running from her past, from herself, from a world that had long turned its back on her. For a long moment, they sat in silence. The distant hum of traffic echoed between the buildings. The priest didn't quote scripture. He didn't speak of God. He didn't try to fix her. He was simply there. That presence, more than any sermon, unraveled her. "Don't think I'm going to confess," she said, her gaze defiant. "I've done too many things. Things not even God could forgive." His gaze stayed calm. "I didn't come for a confession. Just to listen, if you want." The simplicity of that answer unraveled something deep inside her. For years, no one had truly listened to Emily. Everyone judged, everyone labeled her. But in that moment, something broke. She shifted slightly, hugging her knees tighter, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. The priest noticed but didn't push. Slowly, he rose. From his backpack, he pulled out a blue blanket, warm but clean, folded with care. He placed a pamphlet on top with the local parish's service times. He left them beside her. "If you ever need, I'll be there." He didn't wait for a reply, didn't ask for thanks. He simply walked away, his footsteps echoing on the concrete as dusk gave way to night. Emily sat there, clutching the blanket. Her chest ached with an unfamiliar feeling. And that night, she didn't light the pipe thought as the cold night settled. Over the city, she stayed beneath the overpass, wrapped in the blue blanket like armor. It wasn't just the fabric that warmed her. It was the memory of that simple act. Her mind spun, replaying every detail. His calm gaze, the words free of judgment, the respect. It wasn't pity. It wasn't a sermon. It was presence. And in that quiet presence, she'd felt a respect she hadn't known in years. Emily closed her eyes, trying to calm the storm swirling in her chest. She didn't sleep. But something inside her began to stir, like a seed trying to break through the dark. A desire she didn't dare name. A desire to be someone again. She didn't know if she could. She didn't know if she deserved to. But that night, believing in the possibility felt a little less out of reach. The third morning broke slowly over Seattle. The streets remained draped in a veil of dampness. And the first sounds of the city began to stir, distant engines rumbling, wind whistling between buildings, the aroma of coffee and warm bread wafting from cafes and small artisan bakeries opening their doors. In the small room above the parish in Ballard, Father Michael Carter was already awake, as he was every morning. His cassock hung neatly on a chair, waiting for the day's familiar ritual. But this morning, as he opened his eyes, the usual comfort eluded him. Emily's face drifted through his mind with an unsettling persistence. Her hollow gaze, the hesitant way she'd accepted the sandwich, the blue blanket clutched tightly around her frail body. Michael rubbed his hands over his face, weary. His sleep had come only in fits these past few nights. And even when he managed to rest, the thoughts chased him. The prayers that once filled his spirit now seemed unable to reach the growing emptiness inside. The faith that had long been his refuge now felt like an uncertain path. She wasn't the first lost soul to cross his way. But why did this woman affect him so deeply? Sitting at the edge of the bed, he stared at the crucifix on the wall. It had always been a source of peace, but now it reflected more questions than answers. It wasn't weakness. It was something deeper. A calling that didn't come from sacred texts, but from his own heart. "Lord, what do you want of me?" he murmured, knowing no words would answer. Only silence filled the small room. He rose slowly, brewed a strong coffee in the parish kitchen, and set off to attend to the day's duties. Mass, confessions, visiting the sick. But in each act, in every face he encountered, his thoughts returned again and again to the overpass. To Emily, she wasn't simply another woman broken by life. She was a mirror. And in her, he saw his own fractures. The limitations of a priesthood that no longer seemed to fill the void inside him. By late afternoon, with golden light filtering through the church windows, Michael made a decision. He packed his warm backpack again, prepared a simple meal, a chicken wrap, a handful of fruit, a bottle of water, and set off through the streets toward the overpass. His steps were steady, though his chest carried a tension hard to ignore. He didn't know if she'd be there, didn't know if she'd want to see him, but he couldn't resist the pull to return. As he approached, he spotted the slender figure hunched against the wall. It was Emily, her gaze wary, still guarded. But something was different, a faint spark, as if something inside her had begun to stir. Michael approached calmly, set the food beside her without a word, then sat in his usual spot a few feet away. Emily picked up the bundle, but didn't eat right away. Each movement was edged with unease. The silence stretched long between them. The distant hum of traffic filled the space. At last, she broke it. "Still haven't given up, Father?" Her voice no longer carried the same sharpness. It sounded tired, curious. "It's not about giving up or holding on," he answered calmly. "It's about being here, if you want that." Emily glanced sideways at him, as if trying to read him. He wasn't like the others. There was no pity in his eyes, no expectation of anything in return. There was simply a presence that asked nothing of her. After a while, she began to eat, slowly. When she finished, she drew in a breath and murmured, "You shouldn't care about me." The words slipped out, more confession than defiance. Michael met her gaze with calm steadiness. "But I do." A simple truth, spoken without any pretense. And it was that truth that broke through yet another layer of ice within her. The next night, Michael barely slept. He tossed in bed, reading passages from the Bible, seeking answers in prayer. But the words rang hollow. The prayers no longer filled the growing emptiness. Emily's face kept returning, invading every thought, every dream. He was beginning to understand this wasn't just a call of faith. It was something deeper, more human, a feeling that refused to be ignored. And that scared him. By morning, he prepared for another day at the parish, but his heart remained divided. The inner conflict was growing. He was a priest, but he was also a man. And in that woman broken by the world, he saw more than a soul in need of saving. He saw someone who, in ways he couldn't yet explain, made him feel more alive than he had in years. And that truth, still unspoken, was beginning to change everything. The mornings that followed no longer brought the same routine. For 2 days, every time Michael Carter returned to the overpass, the spot where Emily usually stayed was empty. The blue blanket, folded neatly, still remained, a quiet trace. But no sign of her. Scattered papers, faint marks on the ground-clear signs she hadn't slept there the past few nights. Michael would approach, backpack over his shoulder, glance around, wait a few minutes, then leave again, his chest feeling heavier with each visit. It wasn't fear for her physical safety, nor worry about her absence itself. It was the emptiness she left in his soul, the gnawing unease of not knowing where she was, if she was all right, if she would return. With each walk back to the parish, his thoughts tangled further. He tried to focus on the day's duties, but every street corner, every alley in Seattle seemed to echo the same question. Where is Emily? Her absence reverberated even among the pews of the small church. During confessions, as parishioners spoke of guilt and everyday sins, Michael struggled to truly listen. His mind drifted, always circling back to the woman he'd met beneath the overpass. He tried to push the worry aside, telling himself he couldn't control her path. But the truth weighed heavier than he wanted to admit. At night, in his simple room at the parish, he reread passages from the Gospels, searching for some kind of answer. But each line, instead of bringing peace, only deepened the conflict within him. What was the meaning of this connection? What was his role in a story he barely dared to acknowledge? The doubts consumed him. It wasn't fear of breaking a vow. It was something deeper, a fear of not understanding his own heart. On the third day, without any sign of her, Michael could no longer stay within the church walls. After the final morning mass, he grabbed his backpack and left. He didn't head straight for the overpass. He began walking through streets and alleys he rarely ventured into. He stopped at community pharmacies where he knew a Dick sometimes sought help. He passed by shelters, soup kitchens, quietly speaking to others living on the streets. He asked about a slender woman, dark hair, lost eyes. The answers were vague, if they came at all. To the city, Emily was just another shadow, among many. But to him, she wasn't. She had a name, a face, a presence that lived inside him now. And each street crossed in vain only made her absence ache deeper. The search stretched on for hours. Michael wasn't counting the time. By the time the sky had begun to darken, he had wandered nearly every part of downtown. Then, turning down a narrow alley behind a public market, he found her. There, between stacks of cardboard and trash bags, Emily lay collapsed. Pale, sweating, eyes closed. Her body trembled in violent spasms, clear signs of a serious episode. Michael's heart pounded. He knelt beside her, touched her face, tried to wake her. She opened her eyes with difficulty, pupils wide, breath ragged. "Thought you gave up on me?" she whispered, her voice faint. Michael didn't answer. He took out the blue blanket he'd brought, carefully wrapped it around her, lifted her into his arms, and carried her away. Curious glances followed him, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting her out of there. That he knew he couldn't take her back to the parish. The scandal would be inevitable. He couldn't expose her, nor himself. Moving quickly through the streets, he reached a small inn in a distant neighborhood, one where no one would ask questions. He paid for a modest room with what little cash he had. He settled Emily onto the narrow bed, covered her, brought her water, and wiped her face. Her body still burned with fever. This wasn't just exhaustion. It was the toll of days spent fighting, of withdrawal and relapse. Michael sat beside her, holding her hand, watching every breath. He didn't dare pray aloud. He simply stayed there. And in that silence, in that vigil, a truth began to take root. This was no longer just a mission. It wasn't charity. It was something deeper, something no words could explain. The hours crept by. Emily drifted into a restless sleep. Michael sat in a wooden chair, unable to close his eyes. He watched her, caught between fear and tenderness. Was it her fragility that moved him, or the strength he sensed behind that fragility? He didn't know. He only knew he needed to be there. Not out of duty, not from habit, but from a need so deep it no longer fit within the old convictions. By dawn, with a soft light filtering through the curtains, he was still there. Their hands clasped together, his body tired, but unwilling to leave. Something inside him had shifted, and no matter How much he wanted to cling to the certainty of his collar. He already knew. The life he had known would no longer be enough. The modest room at the inn felt suspended in time. Its faded beige walls held the damp scent of old plaster and muffled the distant sounds of the street outside. The distant hum of Seattle traffic, hurried footsteps on the sidewalks, all seemed dulled inside that small, unmoving space. Emily, still weak, rested beneath the blue blanket Michael had carefully arranged over her. The fever had begun to subside, but her closed eyes and pale face revealed the deep exhaustion of a body that had fought for too long. Sitting in a chair nearby, Michael no longer wore his collar. He was in a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, his expression heavy. The sleepless night weighed on his shoulders, but not on his gaze. He was there, not out of religious duty or charity. It was something deeper, more urgent, a calling that didn't come from scripture, but from the heart. And the longer he watched her, the more he understood he had crossed an invisible line. He could no longer see himself as merely a bystander by. Late morning, after confirming that Emily was stable, Michael left to seek help. He couldn't rely on parish resources. He knew this situation demanded more than his own strength and experience. He called an old friend from seminary days, Dr. Paul Sanders, now a physician at a public hospital. The call was brief and to the point. "Paul, I need some advice. Severe withdrawal. I'm doing what I can, but I want to handle it properly." On the other end, a short pause, then clear instructions. Cool compresses, hydration, strict rest. No medication without supervision. Paul didn't ask questions. Michael thanked him and hung up, taking a deep breath. He returned to the inn with fresh water, clean towels, fruit, and light food. Every action was done with a care that went beyond compassion. It was a need to see her well. Emily woke in the late afternoon. Her eyes were clearer now, though still tired. She spotted Michael sitting at the small table, flipping through a worn notebook. When he noticed she was awake, he rose and came over with a tired but genuine smile. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Emily tried to sit up, but her muscles protested. "Weak, but alive," she murmured, her voice rough. For a moment, their eyes met. And what she saw, there wasn't pity. It was presence, genuine interest. "Why are you here?" she asked, more curious than suspicious. Michael didn't look away. "Because you matter, and maybe I need to be here too." His words lingered in the air, filled with a sincerity. They both felt, but neither dared to explore further. With the little money he had left, some of his belongings already pawned, Michael managed to rent a small house on the edge of Greenwood. A discreet place, 2 rooms and a yard where the late afternoon light spilled across dry soil and forgotten flowers. It wasn't much, but it was safe. With the help of a trusted driver, he brought Emily there. Once they arrived, he helped her settle on a clean mattress. He prepared a simple meal, vegetable soup, a piece of fresh bread. In the days that followed, he divided his time between caring for her and fulfilling his church duties. But his absence was starting to be noticed. Parishioners whispered, church elders speculated, and the tension at the parish grew. Michael struggled to balance 2 worlds, the respected priest and the man discovering his own vulnerability beside. A woman he could no longer see as just a lost soul. Slowly, Emily regained her strength. The worst of the episodes eased. Her gaze grew brighter. Each careful act from Michael, each moment of quiet attention, chipped away at the wall of distrust she had built. There was still fear, still shame. But there was also a fragile thread of hope beginning to take shape. One clear night, after a short walk around the small yard, Emily sat on the porch step, gazing up at the stars. Michael came and sat beside her. The silence between them was easy. Words weren't needed. After a while, she broke the quiet. You shouldn't be here. The words sounded more like a warning to herself than an accusation. Michael looked up at the sky, then at her. Maybe not, but this is where I want to be. Emily felt those words echo in her chest. She didn't reply. She simply stayed there, next to him, knowing without admitting that something between them was beginning to change. The days began to pass with a new rhythm in that small house on the outskirts of Greenwood. Emily was steadily recovering, her body growing stronger each morning, her eyes losing their dullness, her voice growing steadier. Michael divided his time as best he could. During the day, he fulfilled the most essential duties of the parish. But every afternoon, he returned to that small refuge that was now becoming the center of his routine. He cared for her with simple gestures, more eloquent than any sermon. He brought fresh fruit, prepared light meals, kept the space clean and airy. Emily, in turn, began to make the space her own naturally. She swept the small yard, planted a few seedlings in old pots, sewed a curtain from fabric Michael had brought. Small acts from someone who, without realizing it, was slowly turning a temporary shelter into a living space. But outside those walls, the world was watching. The murmurs at the parish were growing louder. The superiors had been informed of the priest's increasingly frequent absences. Michael knew the scrutiny was mounting, and he knew that soon he would have to give answers. But that wasn't what troubled him most. What consumed him was the transformation happening inside, more impossible to ignore each day. Every moment spent beside Emily brought a new clarity. It wasn't compassion. It wasn't charity. It was something deeper, real, born from shared moments and mutual care. On nights when she slept more peacefully, he remained awake, thoughts spinning. The cassock, hanging in the corner of the room, seemed heavier with each passing day. Not because of the fabric, but because of what it represented. A path that perhaps no longer belonged to him. And with each of Emily's smiles, with each shared glance, the certainty grew clearer. Soon, he would have to choose. On a warm afternoon, after a simple lunch on the porch, it was Emily who finally broke the silence between them. How long do you think you can keep hiding this, Michael? There was no accusation in her voice, just an honest observation. He sighed, leaning his elbows on the table. I'm not hiding it. Just delaying. Emily looked at him, her gaze serious. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything. There was raw sincerity in her words. But Michael answered calmly, You're not the reason. You're what makes me question if that life is still what I want. The confession hung between them. Emily looked away, her fingers tracing the fabric of her dress. Deep down, she feared being the cause of his fall. But though she couldn't admit it, she wished he would stay. Not out of pity, out of love. The days that followed brought more rumors. After Mass, a member of the parish council approached Michael. Thinly veiled comments, questions carefully phrased to confirm what everyone already suspected. Michael listened calmly, but he knew the confrontation could no longer be delayed much longer. That evening, when he returned home, he found Emily making soup. The soft aroma filled the air. When she saw him walk in, she noticed the tension in his face. She didn't ask. She simply served him a bowl and placed it on the table. During the meal, Michael, tired of keeping his inner struggle to himself, finally spoke. I've been called to a meeting with the bishop. Emily lowered her eyes. Are you going to send me away? The question came as a whisper. Michael reached out and clasped her hand with steady resolve. No, I'm not. It wasn't just a promise. It was a decision already taking root in his heart. On the eve of the meeting, Michael couldn't sleep. He paced the small yard, stared at the starry sky, sat in the living room chair. He reread old letters, seminary notebooks. No answer seemed enough. Only one certainty remained. He couldn't go on living divided. In the morning, he made coffee, served it to Emily. Before leaving, he stood before her, his gaze serious but calm. "No matter what happens, this choice is mine, not yours. Don't carry that burden." Emily gave a small nod of understanding. There was no more room for escape or denial. They both knew this day would mark a turning point. When he walked out the door, she remained seated, staring at the still warm cup on the table, her heart tight. She didn't know what he would face, but she knew what she wanted: for him to return. Not as a priest, but as the man who, without realizing it, had already become everything to her. The morning dragged on at the Seattle Archdiocese offices. The high, austere walls, dark wood-paneled corridors carried an almost immutable solemnity. Time there seemed to move at its own pace, as if decades had little effect on that space. Michael Carter walked through it with steady steps, though inside, the turmoil in his chest had not eased. The meeting had been called urgently by the bishop. It wasn't hard to understand why. His increasingly frequent absences, the rumors already circulating among parish members, the growing unease of the more conservative voices, all of it now culminated in this moment. When he was led into the large room, dominated by a wooden crucifix on the central wall, Michael felt the bishop's gaze settle on him. A look heavy with expectation and perhaps quiet judgment. He sat when invited, hands resting on his knees. He didn't need many words to know this conversation would not be simple. The bishop began in a formal tone, reminding him of the duties of the priesthood, the need for devotion, for complete dedication. He never mentioned Emily by name, never referenced the house in Greenwood. But with every phrase, the doubt, the suspicion, the discomfort caused by Michael's recent conduct was clear. Michael listened respectfully, but inside, a battle raged. Every word from the bishop clashed with a new conviction that had been taking clearer shape each day. When given the chance to speak, he didn't make excuses. He took a deep breath, met the bishop's gaze, and spoke with a rare honesty for such meetings. "I haven't strayed from what I believe, but perhaps my path is changing. I am facing a feeling I can't ignore, nor deny." The silence that followed was heavy. The bishop laced his fingers, carefully studying Michael's posture. It wasn't scandal that the bishop feared most. It was the rupture that was now taking form. After a long pause, he advised Michael to take time for reflection, a temporary leave from his duties, time to reconsider away from the pressures. It wasn't a formal punishment, but a warning. Michael accepted quietly. He knew nothing would change what he felt. The choice had already taken shape within him, even if his lips had not yet spoken it. Leaving the Archdiocese building, Michael didn't return directly to the parish. He wandered through the streets of Seattle, letting the damp air of the city seep into him, its smells, its sounds, the life pulsing through alleys and avenues. With each step, the certainty that had grown during these past days with Emily became stronger. It was no longer a mission of charity. It was not a spiritual calling. It was a real human bond. Inevitable. He thought of her in the little house in Greenwood, where he had left her that morning, still recovering. He thought of the timid smiles now beginning to appear on her face, the careful way she was filling that space, as if, little by little, she was rebuilding a new life. When he finally decided to return, the late afternoon sky was painted in hues of orange and gold. The air had begun to cool. He opened the door to the small house with the key he now carried in his pocket, a symbol of something he no longer wanted to hide. He found Emily sitting on the porch, a shawl around her shoulders, her gaze distant, lost in the yard. When she saw him, her eyes searched his. There was no need to ask how the meeting had gone. She read the answers on his face. Dinner that evening was simple, yet full of meaning they both understood. No speeches were needed. Their gestures flowed naturally, their glances lingering, as if the silence between them spoke louder than any words. After the meal, they sat on the porch, side by side. Emily, wrapped in a shawl, spoke softly. "You don't need to protect me, Michael. I don't want to be the reason for a rupture." Her voice carried both fear and tenderness. Michael took her hand in his, calmly. "You are not the reason. You are my choice." The words came firm, without hesitation. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, feeling that warmth spread through her chest. It was hard to believe someone could see her so clearly. But there he was, speaking without exaggeration what her heart already knew. A path was opening. Not an easy one. But their path in the days that followed, a new routine took hold. Michael temporarily suspended his duties at the parish, as advised. He began spending more time at the house, caring for Emily, rediscovering a feeling that no longer fit within the old framework of his life. Emily, too, was changing subtly. Her skin regained color, her eyes shone brighter. Her body, once frail, grew stronger, but it was her spirit that transformed most. Little by little, she allowed herself to smile more easily, to speak more freely, to share memories and dreams she once thought buried. Their time together became more natural, a closeness that needed no words. One sunny afternoon, as Emily watered the small plants in the yard, Michael watched from the porch with a feeling he could no longer hide, even from himself. It was love. Pure, real, unexpected. A love that made him question all he had been, all he had chosen. And there was no turning back. On a clear night, after a quiet dinner, Michael made a decision. He took an envelope he had tucked between books. Inside, he placed a simple letter addressed to the bishop. It was not a request for temporary leave. It was a formal resignation from the priesthood. Not a rash act, but the result of a deeply considered choice. He wrote each word with care, knowing what it meant. When he finished, he sealed the envelope and placed it on the table. Emily saw it and understood. She approached quietly, resting her hand on his. There was no need for questions. In that gesture, in that look, all the answers were there. Michael smiled softly, a serenity he hadn't felt in a long time lighting his face. It was the start of a new life, and he wanted to live it with her, not as a priest, not as a savior, but as a man who finally allowed himself to love a woman. The next morning dawned clear, with a bright blue sky stretching over Seattle, as if the city itself were breathing in fresh air. In the small house in Greenwood, Emily woke early. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains she had sewn herself days before. The soft chirping of birds echoed in the yard, blending with the light aroma of coffee that filled the room. In the kitchen, Michael was calmly preparing the coffee, his movements focused and steady. The envelope, with his letter of resignation, still sat on the table, waiting for the right moment to be delivered. Wrapped in the light robe he had bought for her, Emily approached slowly. She watched him for a few moments in silence, his profile calm and sure. He was no longer the priest she had met beneath the viaduct. He was a man who had crossed his own limits and made a definitive choice. Noticing her presence, Michael looked up and smiled, a genuine smile free of any shadow. He poured the coffee into 2 mugs, and they sat together at the table in a simple ritual that now symbolized the new life they were beginning to build. They spoke little, but the words came easily. Emily mentioned that she would like to go out for a bit, to walk through the city, to feel alive beyond those walls. A simple wish, yet full of meaning. Michael understood at once. He knew how important it was for her to reclaim her own place in the world, her confidence in herself. He agreed with quiet care. He offered to go with her, not as someone who watched over her, but as a companion. It wasn't about control, but respect. Without hurrying, they got ready. Emily dressed in clothes that now fit her better, her face fresh, her hair tied back simply. When they stepped out into the street, the crisp morning air wrapped around them. Seattle buzzed with its usual energy. Farmers markets, bustling cafes, street vendors. The sense of fresh bread and flowers drifting through the air. Walking those streets, head held high, at Michael's side, was a big step for Emily. And with each step, she felt more certain that she no longer walked alone. As they wandered through the old part of the city, passing fabric shops and small cafes, Michael noticed the glances. Not disapproving, but surprised. A few familiar faces recognized him now without his clerical collar, dressed in simple clothes. It was inevitable. News would soon spread. But for him, what mattered most was seeing Emily smile, even shyly, as she looked at a shop window or felt the sun on her skin. They stopped at a small cafe on a quiet corner, a place where they could sit undisturbed. Emily ordered herbal tea. Michael, another coffee. They lingered there for some time. Emily spoke of her small hopes finding simple work, rebuilding her life without relying on charity. Michael listened attentively. He didn't want to make decisions for her. He simply wanted to stand by her, to support her, as a man who loved and respected the woman at his side. The bond between them was growing stronger in a quiet, genuine way, without pressure, without empty promises. It was real. On the way back, they passed a newsstand. The day's headlines held nothing remarkable, but one of the vendors, someone Michael knew, gave him a small wave. It was a brief moment, but enough for Emily to understand. The rumors were already spreading. It wouldn't be possible to keep Michael's decision private for long. Back at the house, while Emily prepared a light lunch, Michael picked up the envelope from the table. He told her he needed to deliver it in person, not out of formality, out of respect for the path he had chosen. Emily understood. She didn't ask him to stay. She showed no fear. She simply looked at him with a tenderness that said more than any words. Michael left with the envelope in his pocket, his step steady. There was no more doubt in his heart. At the archdiocese, he was received with the usual formality. The air was thick with expectation. When he handed over the letter, he offered no long explanations. He simply said, with calm conviction, "This is my path now." The bishop accepted the envelope with a grave look, but made no attempt to dissuade him. Michael's words said it all. And with that gesture, a new chapter of his life was sealed. When he returned home, the sky had turned orange with the setting sun. Emily was waiting for him on the porch, a shawl over her shoulders, a book in her hands. When she saw him, she rose and went to him. She didn't need to ask. The look on Michael's face, serene and free, told her everything. He embraced her naturally, like a man embracing the woman he loves. There were no titles between them anymore, no imposed roles. Just two people who, after so much being lost in the world, had found each other. That night, they prepared dinner. Together, with simplicity, they shared bread, wine, and quiet conversation. And when the house finally grew still, they did not sleep on the couch, nor in separate rooms. It was time to let their love, now clear and fully acknowledged, take its course. And so it did, with the freedom of two souls who no longer needed to hide. The days that followed brought a sense of lightness Emily had never thought possible. It wasn't a fairy tale or an escape from reality. It was an ordinary life, simple but filled with meaning. Michael still woke early each morning, as always. But now, without the weight of formal obligations at the parish. Breakfast was shared unhurriedly, with quiet conversations about small plans, memories, and everyday gestures that only strengthened the bond between them. Emily, growing stronger with each passing day, had naturally resumed tending to things around the house. She sewed, prepared meals, cared for the plants in the yard. But her desire to rebuild her life wasn't confined to that safe little home. She wanted more. She wanted to stand on her own. One bright afternoon, while Michael read the newspaper on the porch, she brought it up, her eyes shining with new resolve. "I want to look for a job. I can't depend on you forever." There was no sadness, no pride in her voice, just a genuine desire to start over. Michael smiled, understanding how big a step this was for her. "I know, and I'll be right beside you every step of the way." And so they began searching for opportunities. Emily wanted something simple, something that didn't require high qualifications, but would let her rebuild her sense of dignity, one step at a time. Michael discreetly spoke with a few local shop owners he knew. He didn't ask for favors, didn't pull strings. He wanted it to be Emily's choice, her achievement. They found a small neighborhood laundromat run by a respected woman in the community who was in need of a trustworthy helper for daily tasks and assisting customers. Emily was introduced and sat down to talk with the owner, her voice steady, her gaze direct. She didn't hide her past, but she didn't dwell on it either. She spoke about what she wanted now, an honest, simple life. And in that conversation, she earned the opportunity she had been hoping for. The job would start the following week, part-time, just enough for her body and her spirit to ease into a new rhythm. On her first day of work, Michael walked her to the laundromat. He didn't go inside. He simply held her hand for a moment, looked into her eyes, and with a quiet smile said, "It's going to be a good start." Emily took a deep breath and stepped inside on her own. That was how she wanted it. She needed each step from here on to be her own. And it was. The first hours passed with her sorting baskets of laundry, exchanging polite words with customers, and learning through the owner's patient guidance. Emily felt her hands steady, her body moving with purpose. By the end of her shift, she walked out into the street with a soft but genuine smile. She headed home, where Michael was waiting for her. The moment he saw her, his heart swelled with pride that didn't need to be spoken. Together, they prepared a light lunch, sharing the meal like a couple building a new life, one day at a time. Emily spoke about her first day, the small victories, the lingering fears. Michael listened with genuine interest, with deep respect. And that care only made their love grow stronger. Their evenings became moments of closeness and intimacy. It wasn't just physical desire that drew them together. It was a connection of souls, built through companionship, mutual care, and a love that grew stronger with time. Emily, who had once feared giving her heart, now found in Michael a safe harbor, a man who saw her as she truly was, without masks or judgment. And Michael, for his part, discovered the joy of a life that felt full, free from the limitations of the priesthood he had once known. He didn't reject his past, but embraced the present with new passion. Gradually, the small circle of people around them began to accept this new reality. The laundromat owner treated Michael with easy respect, recognizing the bond she saw taking shape. A few open-minded neighbors welcomed the couple with warmth. There was still the occasional judging glances, the whispered remarks, but neither Emily nor Michael allowed that to affect them. They knew their love was stronger than any social convention. It was on a quiet Sunday afternoon, during a stroll through the local flower market, that Michael made another decision. They walked together through the colorful stalls, the scents of lavender and basil drifting in the air. Emily stopped in front of a small pot of violets. Watching her, Michael felt a deep longing to make their life together even more solid, more certain. They walked home hand in hand, and that evening, as they shared a glass of wine beneath the soft light of a lamp, Michael spoke with calm but unmistakable emotion. "I want to make our life official, not just for formality. I want the world to know you are my woman, and that I am your man." Emily's heart raced. She hadn't expected to hear such words so soon, but at the same time, a peaceful happiness filled her. She didn't respond right away. she simply rested her head on his shoulder, letting the silence speak for her. It was another step, one they would soon take together. The decision to make their union official was not made on impulse. It had matured through the many conversations and silences that Michael and Emily shared in the weeks following his resignation. Simply living together wasn't enough. For Michael, who had left the priesthood but not his convictions, nor the faith that continued to shape his view of the world, the love between them deserved a true blessing. It was as profound a choice as the one he had made when stepping away from the priesthood. Since then, he had been attending Sunday Mass at a small parish in Queen Anne, where he could quietly participate as a member of the community, in peace with his own conscience. He wasn't hiding, just respecting the time it took for things and people to settle. His faith remained strong. That was why he wanted his union with Emily to be more than a civil document, more than shared life. He wanted a full marriage, in spirit and in truth. When they spoke about it, Emily listened with an open heart. Never in all that she had lived through did she imagine she would one day stand before an altar. But Michael's words touched her, not out of obligation, but because of the love and respect he offered. It was more than a ritual. It was a true new beginning. In the months leading up to the wedding, life followed a calm and steady rhythm. Emily had become well established at the laundromat, earning respect from both her coworkers and customers. Her days of fear and abandonment on the streets felt distant, not forgotten, but transformed. Michael continued his work in community service projects and remained close to the people in the neighborhood without seeking any return to his former role. He was a different man now, whole, aware of what he wanted for himself and for them. On Sundays, they attended Mass together at that small parish. They didn't go unnoticed, but neither did they cause scandal. The local priest, a man of generous spirit, welcomed Michael with understanding and respect, fully grasping the weight of the choices he had made. When Michael shared his wish to marry Emily, the priest responded with warmth and acceptance. He explained the steps, the required formalities. It wouldn't be a wedding at his former parish, nor a public event, but it would be a sacrament lived in truth. And that was all they needed. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and mild. The sky above Seattle seemed to celebrate with them. The small church, decorated simply with white flowers, welcomed a handful of close friends, Emily's co-workers, supportive neighbors. It wasn't a lavish wedding, but there was an undeniable beauty in every detail. Emily wore a light dress that reflected the new life she was building. In her hair, a small wreath made by a friend. Michael wore a simple but elegant suit, his gaze serene. When she walked into the church, their eyes met with quiet emotion. There were no rehearsed speeches. The way their hands came together before the altar said everything. During the ceremony, the priest spoke of love, redemption, of life paths that cross in unexpected ways. When Michael placed the ring on Emily's finger and she on his, there wasn't a soul in that room who doubted what they witnessed. A true love, blessed and sealed as they had hoped. The small reception was held in the backyard of a friend of Michael's, a former seminary classmate who had generously offered the space for the celebration. The yard had been simply decorated with flowers from the market and linen tablecloths Emily had sewn herself. Friends brought homemade dishes. It was a modest celebration, but full of warmth and joy. Michael and Emily, side by side, welcomed each guest with genuine gratitude. There was no fear, no shame. Emily's past hadn't been erased, but it had been transformed. And Michael, watching her smile among friends, knew he had chosen the right path. As the afternoon wore on and the gathering slowly wound down, the two of them sat quietly together in a corner of the yard, their hands entwined. There was little left to say. It was a moment of peace, of wholeness. The world might still whisper its judgments, but that no longer mattered. They had each other. They had a blessed marriage. They had a new life in the months that followed. Life remained steady and balanced. Emily grew even more confident in her work and began offering help to other women in difficult situations, extending the same compassion she had once received. Michael continued his social projects, now with a renewed sense of purpose. The love between them, built on truth and respect, only deepened. They sought no recognition, only to live their life with integrity. On Sundays, they still attended Mass together, as a man and a woman who, after long and winding roads, had found one another and chosen to walk forward side by side. Each glance, each small gesture reaffirmed that commitment. It wasn't an ending. It was a life in progress, with joys, with challenges, and above all, with a love that would prove stronger than anything they had left behind. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.